Business Better, a Ballard Spahr podcast designed to help businesses navigate the new normal. I'm Bill Rhodes. I'm a partner in Ballard Spahr's Public Finance Group and the leader of our firm's Education Industry Group. Today's podcast show is part of our Bridging Campuses Legal Insights on Education Industry Consolidation series, where we discuss the trends in consolidation and closures in higher education. Our goal for this series is to outline common characteristics of at-risk institutions and explore these legal issues in depth across multiple topics. Today's episode will continue this series and explore various legal issues arising in real estate and tax in the context of higher education affiliations, consolidations, and closures. Joining me today are two longtime colleagues. Sara McCormick is a partner in our real estate department and, like me, resident in our Philadelphia office. And Chris Jones is the practice group leader for our tax group and also based in Philadelphia. So, Sara, I'm going to start with you. Some of our recent mergers in higher education, and we've seen many of them in this area, have a real estate component that's really essential to the transaction. Do you want to talk a little bit about that real estate component?
Sure, Bill. Thank you so much. So I think we should probably divide this discussion into two different aspects. First, could redeployment of underutilized real estate be a part of a solution to avoid the need for consolidation? And second, how does real estate factor into a decision to consolidate? Let me start with the first, and then we'll move on to the second. So underutilized real estate could be used to help a university achieve financial stability. Institutions must assess their real estate holdings to determine the best ways to optimize assets and figure out whether there are opportunities to increase operational efficiencies. It's prudent for all institutions to take stock of their assets, and real estate is often a first place to look just because of the value of these financial investments. So the university would want to look at what assets do we have? How are they being used? Are they located on campus, off campus, somewhere adjacent? Where is their excess or underutilized real estate? And where are their needs? And so that assessment may reveal that certain real estate could be redeployed for university uses. Assessing how an institution is and is not using its real estate assets, particularly in light of our rapidly changing world, technology changes, working from home, online education could reveal opportunities. It could also include transitioning underutilized buildings for non-traditional uses, such as community spaces, offices, K through 12, or affordable housing. One way that a university may decide to use their real estate would be with a joint venture with a private entity or other nonprofits. We've worked with a number of universities using this model for the development of all types of different projects, from student housing, innovation centers, energy facilities, sports facilities, other student amenities. You could use a ground lease structure and other different structures. You could also just be for the development of something completely unrelated to university purposes. This is particularly the case if it's off campus or campus adjacent. I recently worked with a small university that has several hundred acres of real estate that they were trying to figure out what to do with. And they were looking at the opportunities to develop it as multifamily or age-in-place facilities. And in connection with that, they were looking at ways that they could develop synergies since it was campus adjacent with the university, whether by using nursing students and giving them internship opportunities at this facility or the to-be developed facility, or whether there were community education opportunities for the people living at the new development on campus. There might also be opportunities to just dispose of certain assets to mitigate financial strain. This is probably more of an option if it's off campus than on. Any of these options could convert excess real estate into a new revenue stream that could help support the bottom line. While these examples would usually not be sufficient to cure a college's financial issues, they could be part of a broader financial reset at the college. Of course, any of these potential options have to take into consideration any limitations that might apply to the university's use of its real estate. We have the desires of a number of different stakeholders, trustees, professors, alumni, students. You have town and gown relation considerations. The location of the real estate asset plays a role, whether it's on campus versus off. A lot of times there's historic preservation considerations and balancing that with modernization efforts. And a lot of people might have something to say about that. The university's mission and any debt obligations or other restrictive covenants that might be tied to their real estate holdings. Now on to the second point. When a university evaluates the cost and benefit of some form of consolidation transaction, there are so many different factors that they must take into consideration, including challenges of combining campuses, whether that's logistics, the student experience, branding and identity issues, and how the real estate assets will be handled as a part of and following the consolidation transaction. The value of the real estate may be an important driver in the analysis for both parties. Here's an example. We've seen instances where the buyer or the surviving entity does not want or need to actually grow the boundaries of their current campus or add a second campus for that matter. And instead, they may seek to sell newly acquired and now unneeded real estate to offset the cost of integration and improvements and to absorb the new students. For example, new dorms, classrooms, labs, dining facilities. So the excess real estate often results from some of these transactions. A key issue might be the true market value of those excess assets and their marketability in any particular time frame. We would typically expect to have current appraisals of the assets at the closing of the consolidation, but we've seen situations where the appraisals don't truly reflect the market value. There could be a number of issues that impact true market value, such as restrictions on contributed assets, zoning and land use challenges, including the ability to obtain entitlements for alternative uses of the property, historic preservation considerations, the cost necessary to adapt existing facilities to a buyer's intended use, and local real estate market dynamics, just to name a few. If monetizing the excess real estate is really a key driver in the decision to consolidate, higher ed institutions should take a conservative view as to market conditions, including the timing of their ability to sell the assets at fair market value and the true market value, especially in a situation where the proposed disposition is of a large number of buildings at or around the same time. The actual sale proceeds might not be sufficient to meet the surviving entity's expectation as to the amount of proceeds and the timelines of their receipt. In some cases, we've seen where a university needs to seek out some financing or a bridge loan in that interim period. We've also seen transactions where the media portrays it as a merger, but it's really just a real estate deal. No students are moving. And in these cases, the marketability of the real estate may not be as important because presumably the acquiring institution needs the extra land and improvements. And that's why they're doing the deal to fulfill their current or an expanded educational mission.
Thanks, Sara. So, Chris, I'm going to shift to you. And from a tax perspective, what issues do you see in the monetization of excess real estate in connection with the consolidation? I know we see a lot of other tax issues that are coming up, and some of which we talk about in other episodes in the series. But with respect to the monetization or transfer or redeployment of real estate assets, I welcome your thoughts.
Thanks, Bill. So in this space, a lot of the issues that I deal with educational institutions and colleges and universities are related to 501c3, tax-exempt status, and what universities can do and what they can't do. In this space, there's not quite as much of that. There are a lot of tangential issues that come up, and there's also a lot of issues that come up that are not necessarily tax issues per se, but that are issues that are driven by the nonprofit status of a lot of educational institutions. So it's not necessarily something that implicates the tax code, but does sort of come from the fact that they're nonprofit tax-exempt institutions. One thing to start with, we should recognize that public universities may have a lot of additional complexity. There is a good chance that excess real estate that's held by a public university may have been funded by state capital fund appropriations. The state may have rights. The state may have put a lot of conditions on the use of the real estate. And that might limit the ability of a public university to dispose of real estate in the way that a non-public university would be able to do. There may be express limits on the future use of any kind of facilities. There might even be like a clawback of the public appropriations. These kind of issues are coming to light with in the Pennsylvania area, where Penn State's announced that they may close some of their branch campuses. And there's a good chance that some of the real estate that's held by Penn State was funded through state appropriations, and therefore they may not be free to dispose of that real estate in the way that some colleges, universities might be able to. A lot of the other key tax issues that come up really depend on sort of the ultimate buyer, the ultimate use, and how everything is going to be structured in order to dispose of that real estate. One thing, and like I said, this is one of those issues that's not necessarily tax per se, but comes from nonprofit status, is are there any donor restrictions on the use of the real estate? So if a donor contributed real property to a university, maybe even a long time ago, and put restrictions on that use, that may prevent a university from doing exactly what it wants to do in one of these transactions. Recently we saw that the University of Arts had to obtain consent from a major donor to basically allow the contributed funds that it had to be transferred in connection with a transaction. And it ended up, that transaction ended up being, aborted, and the University of Arts ended up having to enter into bankruptcy. There can be these restrictions that are on funds and on real estate that can really prevent a university from having this unlimited menu of options. In the pure tax world, one that I come across a lot are real estate transfer taxes. For example, in Pennsylvania, a lot of state universities are exempt from realty transfer tax, but if they sell their property to an unrelated party, the tax is imposed on the full transaction. There's no advantage given for one of the two parties maybe being an exempt party. So that's not necessarily anything that prevents these from happening, but it does go into the modeling, it goes into the economics, because there could be tax on the transaction. And related to that is the big issue of, is property, if it's disposed of, going to continue to be exempt from ad valorem real property taxes? This is something that has to be dealt with early. If you're selling property to a for-profit user, there's a good chance that it's not going to be subject to any kind of property tax exemption, and that's got to be built into the modeling from day one. And that can be tricky, particularly when property's been assessed as exempt as university use for a long period of time. It might be hard to pin down what the likely tax assessment and therefore the likely real estate tax is going to be. Turning a little bit to a model where maybe there's a joint venture or where the university works with a for-profit entity, are there going to be unrelated business taxable income concerns, UBTI? If there's real estate that is used by an organization but is not directly related to the charitable educational purposes, in its generating income, there could be some unrelated business taxable income. And again, this is one of those that it's not necessarily a deal breaker. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it has to be modeled in, because a university may look at an income stream and see the gross number, but if there's going to be tax that's on that use of the property, they're going to have to model for it on the net basis. Similarly, one option that can come up here is sort of a ground lease, like a financing transaction, essentially where money comes up but allows the university to remain as the fee owner of the property. But a lot of these issues are going to still come into play. For example, many states tax long-term leases. They impose the transfer tax on that. If there's a long-term lease where one of the intervening parties is a for-profit entity, that might terminate the ad valorem property tax exemption. And again, if the university is generating income from a lease arrangement, depending on how it's structured, the university could have UBTI and therefore could be subject to tax. Finally, if any portion of the facilities were financed in whole or in part by tax-exempt bond proceeds, there could be a change of use. There could be a lot of bond issues that come up, particularly if there's a for-profit entity that ends up being involved. A disposition could require the obligor on the bonds to take available remedial options, could defeasance on the bonds, and these can be costly. There's a lot of complexity here, and frankly, we're getting outside of my world once we get into the tax-exempt bond financing, but I understand that Bill and some of our public finance lawyers are going to delve into this very topic in detail in one of the episodes of this podcast series.
Yes, we are going to, Chris. You're right. Well, I wanted to thank Sara and Chris for sharing their thoughts. This is, again, one of a series, and we are covering a number of other angles of legal issues that we see arising. But I do want to thank both of you for your time today. And for those of you, keep an eye out for future episodes coming out. Make sure to visit our website, www.ballardspar.com, where you can find the latest news and guidance from our attorneys. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, please email podcast@ballardspar.com and stay tuned for a new episode coming soon. Thank you for listening.